Hi, I'm Karl Taylor at visualeducation.com, and today we're going to be looking at my 5 top tips for great product photography. Tip number 1, study the product. Now, this might sound obvious, but it's really, really important. Whatever the product is that you're going to photograph, you really need to study it. You need to look at its form, at the aesthetics. You need to identify key features of the product that are important to the client, or key features that will show the product in its best light. Things, for example, on this pair of headphones which I've photographed, are the brand name and ensuring the brand name is visible. Other key features to do with little items like this piece here, where we have this little bit of gold plating, is to ensure that little details like that really shine in the final image. The shape of the product, the form of the product, all of that is defined by the sculpting that you apply with lighting. Now, of course, you need to know how to apply that lighting, but if you don't understand the product form to begin with and the product aesthetics and what it has to offer, you're never going to be able to sculpt that product to your client's desires and requirements. So identify those key elements, identify those key aesthetics, and bring them out in your photography. Now, when I undertake any product shoot, whether it's a personal shoot or whether it's for a client, I spend a considerable amount of time before the shoot really looking at the product and trying to identify which angle will be best, what's going to be shown from one angle compared to another. I then look at things like textures and materials. For example, on this particular product, we have a matte, semi-matte plastic surface for the majority of this curved piece of plastic. But on the inside, we have this beautiful leather material, and also on the ear surrounds as well. But they're completely different textures and completely different materials. Also, of course, the gold metallic plating as well as on the logo. They all reflect light in different ways. Light will react differently on all of these, and you need to be conscious of the product form, the product textures and aesthetics to get the best out of the product. So that's tip number 1, and that's study the product. Tip number 2, gradient lighting. Now, some of you may know what gradient lighting is, and some of you may not understand that. Let me try and simplify. If you think of a normal softbox, which most photographers are familiar with, a softbox is a square or a rectangle of solid light. That means that the entire surface of the softbox is homogeneous. It distributes an even balance of light across that area. But that isn't usually the best lighting for products. And the reason is that most products have a gloss or semi-gloss surface. And what happens with those type of surfaces is that we get what's called image forming reflections. And that means that you can see reflections of the surrounding studio and lighting in the surface of the product. Those we call image forming reflections. Now, this is very important to understand, because what happens is when you surround the product with lighting, the lighting itself is reflected in the product like a mirror, so you can actually see the lighting. Now, when you can see the lighting and you use something like a softbox, you get quite an ugly looking light. You just get like a big blocky square white panel of light. And that doesn't make a product look desirable. So what we do in product photography is we switch to something called gradient lighting. And that's where we create a panel of light, but that light is not homogeneous. It has either a central glow that radiates outwards and becomes weaker and weaker, called a gradient. And we create different types of gradients. So we can create radial gradients with a central hotspot that diffuses away, or we can create linear gradients by using a softbox behind diffusion material so that we have a brighter line that then graduates away. Now, those image forming reflections that then appear in the product surface then look much, much more attractive. It's just our perception of the product and its more luxurious feel, its desirability becomes much, much more apparent and effective when we understand image forming reflections that you can see in the product, and we can control those with gradient lighting. Now, the next thing to consider with gradient lighting is, of course, the shape of the product. If you have a glossy product like a pair of sunglasses or anything that's curved or spherical and glossy, then of course it's going to reflect more of its surrounding area. And when it reflects more of the surrounding area because of the shape of the product, then we need to increase the size of the gradient lighting. And we do this by either moving the gradient lighting much, much closer to the product, so effectively it becomes larger from the product's perspective, or we use much larger scrims so that the entire spherical surface of the product picks up that gradient lighting. The next thing, tip number 3, shooting tethered. Now, a lot of people talk to me about shooting tethered and they think it's an extremely expensive process. They think that you need expensive cameras, expensive equipment to do this. Well, you don't. You can actually shoot tethered into Lightroom, into some of the free software that comes with cameras, and the process for shooting tethered is very simple. You just need a tethering cable, such as a USB-C cable that runs from your computer to your camera, and then you start the tethering process in Lightroom or Capture One or Focus or whichever software you're using, and you can shoot the images directly from the camera into the computer. Now, the advantage of this, of course, is that when you're shooting in a studio environment with a larger screen, you can see the images very, very clearly in a large format on the screen. And that allows you to really study the detail of your lighting. It allows you to really study the depth of field in your images, and it allows you to also measure values so that you can decide whether your lighting exposure is where you want it to be, or if you're replicating a previously recorded shot, you can refer to the previously recorded RGB values and then replicate those again. But doing all of this tethered gives you far more control, far more precision, and much greater ability to really study the product. The other advantage, of course, is that if you're shooting for a client or you have an art director there with you on the shoot, they can see the images as well, they can direct the shoot, and between you, you can make really positive decisions to improve the lighting or improve the composition of the product, much, much more so than you can possibly achieve by just looking at it on the camera. Now, other advantages of shooting tethered is the actual flow and process of the shoot. It slows you down and it allows you to think more carefully about the results and the product. So you can study those results and make adjustments step by step in a much more precise way than you can shooting just to the camera. Another great advantage is that often when we're shooting product photography, we may want to take a series of pictures at different focus points to maximize depth of field. Now, when we're doing that type of work, focus stacking, it's very important that we don't move the product or move the camera. And the other advantage of shooting tethered is that you can control and trigger the camera directly from your computer. You also have full control over your aperture and settings on the camera directly from the computer. So once your composition is set, there is no need then to touch the camera and accidentally knock anything. So shooting tethered is a key advantage for shooting product photography. Tip number 4, knowing your white values. Now, this might sound quite simple, but a lot of product photography involves creating clean, pure white backgrounds so that you don't have to cut the product out. This is especially important in pack shot photography, e-commerce photography, because you want to get those backgrounds and surfaces a beautiful pure white so that they can just drop those images straight onto the catalog page. Now, a lot of people struggle with this, and this is something, again, that we get a lot of questions about on our platform at Visual Education. And the reason people struggle with this is that they set their lights on their background to create a bright white. But what they don't realize they've done is they've actually overexposed the background and are now flooding the product with additional light from behind, often causing flare or other lighting problems on the product. Now, if we maximize our understanding of RGB values, you will know that RGB values of 255 in each channel, that's 255 in red, green and blue, means that you've achieved pure white. But if you were 1 or 2 stops over that, the value would still read 255 in each channel and you wouldn't be aware of it. So the way I work when trying to achieve pure white backgrounds is actually to set the value at around 250 or 252 in each channel to begin with. So we're slightly below pure white on our background value. Because often what happens is as you add additional lighting to the product from the front of the product, some of that light is cast and will fall on the background, slightly increasing those RGB values. And eventually, when you get to the stage where you're ready to take the final shot, if your RGB values are coming in at around 254, you then know you're not overexposing your background and you know that you're very, very close to that final 255 value, which you can easily tweak up to 255 in post, or at the very last stage, you just increase your background lights by 1/10 of an f-stop. And then you've got pure white, but without affecting the product or causing flare. Now, another tip to go with that is to not put your product too close to your white background. Leave enough space between your background and your product so that the reflection from your white background doesn't adversely affect the product. Tip number 5, making liquids glow. Now, many products that we need to photograph involve liquids. For example, this might be beverage photography. It might be food photography. It might be cosmetics and perfumes or bottles with transparency. It's very difficult to figure out how to put a light through those products to get them to glow, because you really want to make that beverage or cosmetic look its absolute best, and giving it a really nice glow through the product really enhances its desirability. Now, one of the ways that we achieve this is by simply using gold cutout reflectors that allow us to bounce light off of our key light through the back of the product. Now, we can do this 2 ways. We can cut out a reflector that matches exactly the shape of the bottle from the camera perspective so that you don't actually see the reflector, and then you end up with a beautiful gradient glow through the liquid itself. Another way of doing it, which a lot of photographers do, is just to use a larger gold card behind the product. They don't worry about seeing the gold card, they just hold it at the right angle behind the product to get the glow through it, and then they mask that product out afterwards in the final stages of post-production by combining 2 shots. 1, the main shot of the product, and 2, the shot with the gold card and the glow through it. And then they can arrive at a final image that has that beautiful, desirable glow through the product. So those are my 5 top tips for product photography. If you'd like to see more or learn more, then you can view many videos on our platform at visualeducation.com, where you can see me implement those ideas into various product shoots, as well as many other top tips for your product photography. I'm Karl Taylor. Thanks for watching.